I'm going to start off by introducing our four panelists. Then I will spend about 5 minutes talking about online bullying and the context of what's happening at the moment before Jamie speaks, Jamie Bartlett, and then all our panelists will speak for about 5 minutes about their experiences and outlook on this. Jamie is going to be presenting some new statistics on online bullying. So I shall introduce him now. He is director of the Centre for the Analysis of Social Media, a collaboration between Demos and the University of Sussex. His work focuses on the ways in which social media and modern communication and technology are changing political and social movements, and he is currently writing a book about internet subcultures. Then we have Ava Vidal, who is one of the country's leading comedians and commentators. Ava became a mother at 18 and spent 5 years as a prison guard at Pentonville before becoming a performer. She's a fixture on the stand-up circuit and performs in the UK, the US, Canada and Australia, as well as appearing regularly on TV. She has written for The Independent and The Guardian and used the racist abuse directed at her as fuel for her acclaimed solo stand-up show. Then we have Catherine Mayer. Catherine is editor-at-large for Time magazine. She's the author of Amortality, The Pleasures and Perils of Living Agelessly, and she's currently writing a biography of Prince Charles. And then we have Caroline Criado-Perez, a freelance journalist and feminist campaigner. She's co-founder of the Women's Room, an organisation and database that campaigns for more women experts in the media. She led the campaign to keep women on banknotes, for which she received a barrage of rape and death threats. She's currently writing a book about inspiring women around the world. So I remember being on a panel like this in about 2006 or 2007 with other feminist journalists. And at the time, we had all experienced a lot of kind of rape and death threats. So it was a fun panel. As you can imagine, we talked a lot about dismemberment, about mutilation, about that sort of thing. It was great. And so this has been going on for a long time, sort of misogyny and racism, obviously, online. But what seemed to happen last year was a watershed moment in terms of women speaking out about this. So we had Caroline in the UK who spoke out about the rape threats that she had received after her campaign. We had Lindy West, a feminist writer in the US, who spoke out about the rape threats that she had received. And we had, what was quite interesting was that we had a lot of women in the public eye who are not known for being feminists, although they might be feminists, but who are not primarily known for being feminists, talking about the abuse they had received. So you had someone like Mary Beard, who said that she, after appearing on TV, had experienced truly vile abuse online. You had Lauren Maybury of the band Churches saying that she'd been reduced to tears more than once as a result of the abuse she had received. And most interestingly for me was Ruby Tando, who was a contestant on the Great British Bake Off. And as it turns out, Ruby is a brilliant feminist. She's written fantastically about the abuse that she has received and about feminism more generally. But when she was on the show, she was there as, you know, a former philosophy student, she was there as a former model, and as someone who is really good at baking. So in terms of her sort of challenge to the patriarchy, she wasn't really there as like rabble-rouser #1. And yet she received a massive stream of abuse, people calling her a filthy slag, for instance. And I think for me, that kind of made it clear that this is a tactic to try and sort of silence women generally. So not just feminist debate, but women generally who dare to sort of move into public space. There's obviously been a change in the arenas where this kind of abuse plays out, because in the past you might have had a comment stream of hundreds or thousands of comments, which could be very, very traumatizing. But now, of course, with social media being so big, what tends to happen is that this abuse is coming into your Twitter stream, or it's coming at you on Facebook, and it's coming at you in forums which are very much just a sort of extension of people's general social space and social circle. And so it's coming at you on forums that, you know, it's in your phone, it's in your pocket, it's on your bedside table. And Amanda Hess, who is a US writer for the Pacific Standard, she wrote a very interesting piece earlier this year, and she was writing about that. And I just wanted to quote some stats that she wrote about. So she wrote that women are more likely to report being stalked and harassed on the internet. Of the 3,787 people who reported harassing incidents from 2000 to 2012 to volunteer organisation working to halt online abuse, 72.5% were female. Sometimes the abuse can get physical. A Pew survey reported that 5% of women who used the internet said something happened online that had led them into physical danger. And in 2006, researchers from the University of Maryland set up a bunch of fake online accounts and then dispatched them into chat rooms. Accounts with feminine usernames incurred an average of 100 sexually explicit or threatening messages a day, and masculine names received 3.7. So that's the kind of context that we're working within, and the question for the panel is how it affects them and what we can do about it. Should we just ignore it, or are there ways of puncturing it and challenging it? So yeah, let's start with Jamie.
Okay, thank you, and thanks very much for having me. My job is to present some statistics for you, hopefully in an exciting and engaging way. It won't be churning through a really dull PowerPoint. Myself and three colleagues over here, Richard, Simon and Rebecca, have been working to produce some new data for this event. It's a study of understanding the way in which certain words are being deployed on Twitter. It's not a perfect study. It's approximate statistics and percentages that we've tried to work out. And indeed, it's not a study of misogyny online. We actually started with that great ambition to try to somehow measure the level of misogyny online, and we couldn't even get past the definition, much less trying to work out what words we should be searching for. It's, as you all know, I'm sure, a very complicated thing. So instead, what we tried to do was to look at specific words and how they are used over time and who's using them. So I'm going to just try to present some of those statistics for you. You're the first people to see them, so I'll also be very interested in your feedback. And I'm going to have to sort of caveat this, that I'm going to have to use all of these words quite openly and bluntly for the purposes of time, and not to trip over myself trying to apologise for what other people have written. So that's just a warning. It's probably easiest if I stand up, because I can't really see what I'm showing you. So I don't know if that's going to mess up the recording, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Do you need to?
Okay, so can you hear me okay? Make sure I get the camera. Okay, so the first thing that we
Thank you.
I'm sorry, can I use this? Is that on? Can you hear me? Do I just sit down? Okay. Yeah. Hello? Two. 1, 2, 1, 2. Okay. So the first study that we ran was looking at between December the 26th and the beginning of February the 9th, the number of uses of the word rape on Twitter in the UK. So it's English language versions of this word in the UK. Over the period, we had approximately 100,000 cases. of this word, and you can see how the uses spike. It's not entirely clear, but essentially what happens here is you have a sort of a rumbling effect, and then suddenly there's sort of spikes when something in the media happens that people then pick up on. We split the words between media and conversational uses. Essentially on Twitter what happens is a lot of people will tweet about news stories that they've seen or read about, and that accounts for about a third of the cases. But then a lot of people will use the word in conversation between each other, and that's really what we were most interested in. So this is just to give you a sense of the volume. We then took 500 of these cases and looked at them in detail to try to work out rough proportions of how we thought they were being used. Now, these are our measurements and these are our categories, but very broadly speaking, so this is to give you a rough idea, we thought about 40% of them were people talking about serious news issues, reporting on a news story or something that they'd read. But about 30% of them were what you might call a metaphorical or a casual use. Very frequently the word rape is used referring to a sporting event or a test that people were going to take, that they were using that as a way of describing how well they were planning to do in this test. And the case that I give you is a common one of a football match. Around 12% we thought were, it's hard to be sure, but were quite threatening or abusive. So targeted at somebody, varying degrees of severity. But when you look at what that would mean over the course of a single week, you're talking about over 1,000 cases in English in the UK alone. And these are only the tweets that we could locate to the UK, which is probably only about 30% of them. So if you were to extrapolate that out, you might be talking about closer to 5,000 cases a week in the UK of what you might consider threatening or abusive uses of that word. And as ever on Twitter, there are many cases which we didn't predict or imagine. The Nirvana song Rape Me was quoted over and over and over again about a quarter of the times. Okay. Yes, so the second study that we did was looking at, we selected a huge number of what we thought were quite misogynistic terms, and we collected those over a month, over January. In the end, the two that were used by far the most frequently were slut and whore, and in total in the UK, in English, was about 100, just over, I think it was 130,000 cases in the UK of these words being used. And as you can see, interestingly, I know it's not very clear, but as you can see, they actually mirror each other. So when one's being used a lot, the other one tends to be being used a lot as well. These words, slut and whore, are not used so much as you might imagine talking about media or news stories, because they're very rarely terms that are used in news articles themselves, especially in the headlines. But there is a slight difference between people talking about the term itself and people using the term when they're talking to each other. And what you tend to find is there are huge spikes in conversations on Twitter where people are using these words, often driven by these smaller spikes underneath that tend to be some reference to a news story of sorts. Now, this is how we thought they were used. Again, we took 500 randomly selected cases and we tried to break them down as best we could. Here it's slightly different. About 10% we thought were serious and non-offensive, and we had a lot of comment on the idea of slut-shaming and people talking about that as a concept and critiquing it or whatever. We had the same problem with sort of casual uses. 35% were people talking to each other or about themselves, using these words quite in a very casual sense. And when we looked into that a little deeper, what we found was it was often quite young girls, sort of 16, 17, 18-year-old girls, who were talking to each other, calling each other sluts and whores, often with accompanying photos of themselves, selfies of themselves, and sort of abusing each other that way. I mean, it's sort of playground language, and it's sometimes hard to know quite how serious to take all of that. But that made up the single biggest proportion of the data set. You can see the other statistics, so I won't go through them all, but about 20%, about 1 in 5, which if you did this extrapolation I did before, about 1 in 5, which is 5,000 a week in our data set, which if that's about 30% of the total data set, you're talking about 15,000 perhaps, which we considered to be quite abusive, quite aggressively targeted, often at an individual, which are using those words as a form of abuse. Of course, there's thousands of other ways that people abuse each other without using these words. And that's the point I want to sort of make. But just in terms of what we were able to find, this gives you a good flavour of how these terms are being used on Twitter. And these graphs look really boring, and they are quite boring. But what these are designed to show you is that overall, both of these data sets that we collected, the words were being used roughly 50% by men and 50% by women. And they tended to be used by a lot of people once or twice. This is what's called the power law. So is it one person who tweets 5,000 times using this word, or is it 5,000 people tweeting once using this word? You'd have the same final number, of course. Overall, it's a lot of people using these words a small number of times. So what that means is in our data set for the slut and whore data set, we had something like 75,000 unique users that were responsible for our 130,000 cases, if that makes sense. And you know what? I think that might actually be the... Oh, yeah, I had a slightly strange case study about Dappy. I didn't know what this was, and I don't really know who Dappy is either, but I think some of you probably will. But this gives you a little case study to finish off with about how these conversations on Twitter tend to go. Frequently, there is a news story that gets picked up by all of the newspapers and by the prolific tweeters, and then sort of spreads out into a broader social conversation on Twitter. And so what happened here is we had people suddenly started talking about Dappy in relation to something that happened on Big Brother. I think some of you might know this case, but there was some argument about something he said to a competitor on Celebrity Big Brother. So what happened here was you had suddenly people using these terms, talking about Dappy, and using the word slut and whore. And then when the Dappy conversations drifted away, the general conversations using those terms carried on beyond it. It was a sort of spark that got a conversation that went on and on and on and on. And that's very, very common when you look at the way these terms are being used. Something sparks it off, and then it spirals out for many hours afterwards and brings more and more people into it. I think that is all of my slides. Just to reiterate, this is one small snapshot. And Twitter is one social media platform, of course. And the other thing is that all of this sort of depends on the month that you collect the data. Every month something new is happening. Every month some different news story seems to capture the public imagination. But what you do find overall, I think, is that these terms and these words are remarkably widespread in their usage. Lots and lots of people are using them. And the thing that I want to sort of stress overall is the way that people use them is often so thoughtless. And one of the big questions, I think, for all of us is the ways in which general language usage begins to translate or reflects broader societal attitudes. I can't really answer that with this data set, but hopefully it gives you at least some kind of framework for the rest of the discussion.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jamie. So, Abba.
Hi. I don't have any slides or anything like that. Just my experience of online bullying, well, online name calling, really. I've had quite a lot of it. It got to the point where it had got so bad that I had deleted my original Twitter account because it was just too much. And I'd actually thought to myself, I'll delete Twitter, and then what they're going to do. And they simply emailed it to me. So it's no longer limited to 140 characters, so I made my own life worse. I've had quite a lot of bullying, and a lot of the bullying tends to be sexist and racist as well. It has got to the point where if I do a TV appearance now, I will lock my Twitter for a couple of days, either side of it, because if they come to your account and they see it's locked, they tend not to bother. I do think, sort of like the report that last year people started coming out and speaking about online bullying women is not quite true. And I know as a black woman, and I know a lot of other women of colour, have had a massive problem with a lot of white women who've complained about online bullying, because we have had to put up with it for a long time. I mean, the bullying becomes very racial. I've had people telling me to watch my mouth and remember where I would have been 200 years ago. I've had members of the EDL threatening to come to my shows and lynch me. Just really, really quite disturbing stuff. And most black women who are online, who actually have an opinion, have had to put up with it for a long time. And we have been speaking a lot about intersectionality, and that conversation is often squashed by people going, oh, well, you know, people are listening to us now. Stop causing trouble, black women, you know, people are addressing us. And a lot of Muslim women I know have to put up with it, particularly after, like Jamie said, there's certain events like the Lee Rigby thing. I mean, the abuse of Muslim women online was absolutely disgusting. And what I find infuriating is the fact that when we point out this extra level of bullying that we have to tolerate, we are accused of not being, you know, like there's no solidarity. We're all women together. I think people need to understand and recognise that we are women together, but there are certain layers and certain things that we have to address. There are things, obviously, that all women have. I mean, Stuart Lee has online bullying, and he has said that when they bully him, the rape threats go, we'll rape your mum, we'll rape your wife, we'll rape your daughter. But they don't ever tend to say, we'll rape you, as we have to put up with. I know appearing on a show like Mock the Week, especially one that's got quite a lot of younger followers, they feel that they have the right to start tweeting at you and having a go at you for what you wear. And it's quite disturbing, actually, because some of these people are quite young. I mean, I had an 18-year-old boy who was tweeting at me and abusing me about my weight and my political beliefs. And I just find it actually quite frightening that there is actually a next generation. And we're always led to believe that things are getting better. And I don't know, when it comes to sort of the online experience, if it's actually drawing these people out that we didn't know were there before, or have they always been there? And it's kind of scary. And sometimes you do get a bit paranoid and you think, my God, you're walking down the street, you think, is it you? Is it you? Is it you? You know, because they're always threatening to come and physically get you. And I think because the racial sexist bullying is not taken that seriously, I have now got to the point where I defend myself quite a lot. And I will hit back if you send me a lot of things, and maybe sometimes there's been a spike in the use of the C word, and that might be me. I'm just not having it anymore. And I just find it really interesting when you do challenge these people and you do start having a go back at them, how they start going, oh, you're really rude. It's like, I didn't ask you to tweet me with this stuff. I didn't ask you to start bothering me. And I had one guy going, let's call it a truce, let's call it a truce. And I was like, hell no, no. And he blocked me in the end. I don't know. I really don't know what else to say with it. I find it frightening, and I really do hope that there can be, there seems to be steps towards it. People like Liam Stacey going to prison. I think people really need to know how serious it is. I think, and I don't like saying it, I think as a black woman I have grown up and had to fight on so many levels that I am prepared to sort of fight it and stuff, but I shouldn't actually have to. And so I hope something can be done about it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Abba.
Well, I think I probably have an easier time of it than the other women on the panel. I get abuse, and I did indeed get a ludicrous bomb threat last year. But most of what I'm abused for is being old, and I am old. So I'm not quite sure what I'm going to say back to that. I also get a lot of abuse for being a woman, and I stand guilty as charged. So one of there are two things that have already come up in what Jamie and Ava have talked about. You just asked a very important question, which is, were people like this already, or is Twitter, are the social media sort of encouraging people to become more extreme? And there's also the question about how you deal with it. And a third question, which I'm always asked, is what did you do to get the bomb threat? What did I do? Which is why I'm making the point about being, a woman and an older woman who dares to go on TV, which is, shocking, and therefore I need to be told how very old I'm looking today. Thank you. I think I got that particular bomb threat because of Caroline. I'm not, of course, blaming Caroline. I have never met Caroline before today. What happened was that I thought that the campaign that she led on banknotes was very good, and so I commented about it, about how good it was. And I also had a conversation with Stella Creasy, who I'm friendly with. And I think that was enough to earn me a death threat. When I saw it, although it was somebody saying that they'd put a bomb in my house, I did not for one moment take it seriously as a threat to my life, which instantly created a dilemma, because the police, because it involved a death threat, and because in fact another journalist who'd already got a threat had already talked to the police, and people were already commenting about it online, I went to the police knowing that in a sense I felt playing into the hands of the person who had done it and wasting police time. On the subject of wasting police time, I then quickly found out that possibly I was actually helping the police, because I ended up teaching them something about Twitter that they didn't know. That was really fascinating. Some very nice people got involved in the case, but they didn't know anything about social media at all. They were talking to me about IIP addresses, and when I tried to give one of the policemen the Twitter handle of the person who'd left the threat, he kept saying, "Is that a code?" And then they came round to my house, and they suggested to me I should leave my house for my own safety, and I said, no, that's a ludicrous overreaction. I don't have time for this. But they then suggested that I should leave Twitter. Now, I'm a journalist. That's like saying don't use the phone, don't use email. It is a tool of my trade, and that was never, for me, a question. People don't understand, I think, the use of social media in the sort of job that I do, but it is a really important research tool, it is a really important communication tool. So that then really does become oppressive if the idea is that, okay, to avoid this, the police tell you to leave it. No way. Now, I then ended up going on various programs like the Today program to talk about it, mainly because, again, it was getting misrepresented, and also Twitter annoyed the hell out of me by issuing a statement saying they'd apologized to me when they never even responded to my original complaint. So I did feel the need to go and vent about it. What I did not do is take up the invitation to discuss how we should have responded, because Caroline was responding in a way which is not a way I would choose, but I did not want to get in a discussion that led us open to a lack of solidarity. And it's the same with the way you deal with it. I personally think that engaging with them individually is not my choice, because I think they're attention seekers, and I think that it gives them pleasure if I engage with them. I'm very tempted often to use humour against them. It's always been my approach when writing about the far right. I remember interviewing Nick Griffin, the head of the British National Party, and within 5 minutes of the interview starting, he'd compared himself to Mahatma Gandhi, and I just thought, yes, brilliant, I can now quote you absolutely deadpan, and people are going to laugh at you, and job done. What I'm saying, however, is I think your choices are valid in terms of, you had the hashtag shouting back, and you know, totally valid choices. And one of the dangers of these situations about women in the media, women coming under attack, is that we end up being tempted into attacking each other. You know, as I say, my personal choice is I just ignore them individually, and then I take every opportunity I can to mock them generally. But your choices are valid. I will never go on the media or anything other than a controlled circumstance like this to even question those choices.
Thank you. Caroline.
Okay. Which is the button to press? One on the right. Okay. Oh, thank you. Is it on? No, not on. Well, I'm going to do the PowerPoint first, so hopefully it'll be on by the time. Okay, so I'm just going to run through some quick screenshots which should give you a little bit of an idea of what was coming into my phone, onto my computer, into my mind from July to September last year. Or I'll just turn it off. No? What button do I press? I'm not going to be speaking. What button do I need to press? Okay, here we go. No. Sorry. Okay. Is this on? Does it sound like it's on to you? Okay, so I wonder what it's been like for you this past minute, seeing just a few of the messages I received over July, August, and September last year. I wonder if you feel shocked. I wonder if you feel horrified, disgusted. I wonder if you feel disbelief. Maybe you feel all of these emotions. But I bet you don't feel scared. Because for you, these really are just words on a screen. They may be shocking, but they're not personal. There's something that happened to someone else. Something you can and probably do deplore. But something you can separate yourself from. That's not how it was for me. When these men started to tell me how they would find me, when they started looking for my address, when they told me it could be someone I knew, when they told me how they would hunt me down, tie me up, beat me, mutilate me, rape me, kill me, I was scared. I was terrified. My life ground to a halt. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't work. I functioned on a mix of adrenaline and terror. I felt hunted. I couldn't get the images out of my head. I was scared every time the telephone rang, showing a blocked number. I was scared every time the doorbell went. It's been 7 months since the abuse was at its worst, and I can still remember so many of the threats off by heart. I still approach my Twitter and email accounts with trepidation, often looking at them out of the corner of my eye if it's one of the days when I'm not feeling strong enough to cope with another attack. I still have a panic alarm installed in my house. I still know how little it takes to trigger me back to those dark days where I was pushed to the edge of a nervous breakdown and almost fell off. And I still hate talking about it. People want to talk to you about the abuse as if it's a theoretical debate topic, as if it's not a trauma inside you, a black ball of bile that's been tweeted into your soul and makes you into someone that on the bad days you barely even recognize. But I keep talking about it when I can. And one of the reasons I do is because one of those tweets that you'll have seen at the beginning, the tweet that says, "Shut your whore mouth or I'll shut it for you and choke you with my dick." I just felt that tweet said it all. This was what the onslaught was about. It wasn't about Jane Austen, it wasn't about banknotes, it wasn't even really about feminism. It was about a woman's voice, about how that voice still isn't welcome in public, and about the sexually violent lengths to which some men are prepared to go to keep those voices quiet, to banish them back to the kitchen where they belong. When people talk about online abuse, they often wring their hands about freedom of speech. We can't impose restrictions, they say, brave freedom fighters for the right to threaten rape. We must fight for our rights against the censorious voices of those who wish to be free to share their opinions without being terrified of sexually violent consequences. Well, you know what? You're right, hand-wringers. This is about freedom of speech. But it's not the freedom of speech that you think. This is about the freedom of speech of the oppressed. It's about the freedom of speech of those who have been denied a voice. It's about recognizing the effect that your speech has on mine and my right to tell you about it. It's about my freedom of speech to stand up and say, no, this isn't right. It isn't right that for the vast majority of the world, female participation in government stands at under 30%. It isn't right that women make up 80% of pictures in newspapers that are considered unrelated to the news story and only there for what's called a lift, while men make up 84% of the subject matter of lead stories. It isn't right that in this country women get paid so much less than men, that we work most of the last 2 months of each year for free, despite the fact that the Equal Pay Act has been enforced for over 40 years. It isn't right that women make up 70% of the 2 billion people who live in poverty around the world and that 2/3 of the global illiterate are women. It isn't right that some of us get groped on our way to work and then get sent rape threats for saying we won't put up with it. It isn't right that 1 out of 3 women globally experience violence, causing the World Health Organization just last year to declare violence against women a global health problem of epidemic proportions, and they're not an organization to use the term epidemic lightly. It isn't right that 1 in 4 women will experience sexual violence in her lifetime, and that women make up 89% of those who experience 4 or more incidents of domestic violence. It isn't right that a woman is abused by her partner an average of 35 times before she goes to the police, and yet the UK police receive a call to report domestic violence every single minute. It isn't right that in the UK alone, 2 women die every single week from domestic violence, and that figure has been static for the last 15 years at least. While around the world, women are being beaten, raped, excluded, spoken over, killed. To be silent on the topic is unforgivable. To be silent is to be complicit. So no, Mr. Tweeter, I won't shut my whore mouth. Not for you, not for anyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Thanks. That was great. I was thinking actually while you were talking about silencing, and I wanted to ask Ava, because you write for Telegraph Wonder Woman, don't you? And I just wondered, and obviously you appear on TV shows, so you appeared on Mock the Week, and you appear on The Right Stuff, don't you, sometimes? I'm so sorry. The Fools. So basically, no, but what I wanted to ask was whether, for all 3 women, whether you've actually changed what you feel confident saying in a public space, so whether it's in a paper or it's on the telly, whether it's actually changed what you say, this kind of trolling.
Can you hear me? Are these, okay. No, it hasn't actually. It's made me speak out and be stronger about it, because I tend to find the silencing doesn't just come from these guys. I mean, I would just sort of make the point, because often when we speak about how we deal with things from different sections of society, then people will be, and I had this discussion with Laurie Penny when she was talking about what Rod Liddell said, going, oh, just ignore it, rise above it.
What had he said?
He'd called the Lee Rigby murderers black savages. Just had huge racial connotations, which I objected to, and she was like, oh, rise above it. Some people like you will say, mock them gently. Can I just point out, the BNP do not mock people like me gently. I can't afford to be laughing and joking or, with these are people who have attacked my family. These are people where I've been walking down the street with friends and had to literally run for my life. I don't mock and laugh and joke with the EDL, but these are people who burn people's mosques down and attack Muslim women. So therefore, even the suggestion, the fact that there's the lack of understanding that we're saying, as different people. I'm not a lesbian woman. I don't have men threatening to rape me straight. So if a lesbian woman chooses to deal with it in the way she wants to deal with it, it's something that she's consistently had to put up with. So I wouldn't say, oh, laugh with them, mock them. It's not funny.
Yeah.
And so the silencing doesn't just come from these types of people. It comes from other people in instructing you how to feel and how to deal with these things.
Yeah.
And so, no, it hasn't made me quieter at all. I mean, the Wonder Woman section have turned off my comments because they're like, we can't moderate this. It's just...
That's really interesting.
They are...
Yeah.
Actually, to be honest, I think The Guardian is worse. When I've written for The Guardian, it's much worse than it has been when I've written for The Telegraph. But no, I speak about this stuff more and more because I think that they are cowards.
So it sort of fuels you in some ways.
Yeah, because they don't, when they're telling you shut your whore mouth or, you know, threatening to stick their tiny dick in it, they are doing it because they want you to be quiet. And actually, when you do take them on, they actually get a bit scared because that's not what they expected or not what they wanted. And I come from a community that's had to fight.
Yeah.
We've had to fight across the world for our rights and being, you know, water hosed and had dogs set on us and stuff. And that's why when they had that women like Twitter silence day, we were trying to say we won't be silent. We've fought too hard for the right to speak.
Yeah, excellent. And Catherine, has it changed your sort of public profile at all, or does it not?
That incident didn't. I mean, let me make clear, what I was talking about was my own personal tactic. I was not advising, you know, a strategy for either of you. My own personal tactic in dealing with social media. But, as I said, I do not in any way imply that as a criticism of either of you, precisely because I think the scale and nature of what the two of you attract is very different from what I attract, and that's what I'm acknowledging here. As far as the Twitter silence, that was, however, a really good example of what I'm talking about. I don't know how many of you were aware of that, but I think it was Caitlin Moran, was it, who decided that she would try and launch a kind of a silence on Twitter in order to mark the abuse against women. And the problem with that was that women disagreed with it for very valid reasons, but it turned into a fight among women, and that's something that I am very keen to avoid fueling. I think we need to have vigorous debates about things, but I think that we can lose some of our power by ending up fighting each other instead of turning around and acknowledging where the problem's coming from. And so that's one of the reasons I've been quite loath to even get into a lot of this debate publicly, and I didn't join in the Twitter silence debate. In terms of my own profile or what I do, in answer to your question, I mean, when I talked about laughing at people, I happen to think that's an incredibly potent weapon. And I have made a lot of effort, for example, over the years to cover the far right because I think they are a huge and pernicious threat. And it is something that it is incumbent on people like me who have the voice of the mainstream media behind, you know, to magnify what I'm doing, to do that, exactly that sort of thing. It is because I take them seriously that I laugh at them, if you like. It is also because I have got angrier over the years that I am on the committee of this festival and care so much about this festival. I remember when Jude Kelly first came to me and asked me to help her with this festival, that I was profoundly depressed because I was thinking, you know, when Jude and I were young, we thought, both of us, really, that the aims of feminism were tantalizingly close. We sort of thought we were among the last generations to have to fight in this way, to have to put up with the stuff that you're putting up with. You know, when I first went to work as a journalist, I was one of 4 women in a staff of 100. And I was hit on by just about every single man I worked with, and you know, the harassment was so standard, the standard part of life. And So, you know, there are ways in which things have got better, but there are ways. I made the mistake back then of thinking it was linear, of thinking that progress was, you know, things would just get better and better and better for women. And what's actually happened is that things have got better for some women in some ways, and they have got worse for some women in some ways. And I may be laughing, but I'm absolutely furiously angry as it happens. And so I'm out there using every weapon I have to make these things clear.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask one more question and then I'll throw it open. Caroline, you took the threats that you had received to the police, and I wondered whether you would sort of recommend that to other women who experience online trolling and abuse.
Only if you have amazing reserves of energy and great support behind you. The police were, I can only describe them as criminally inept. In fact, one of the women who was supporting me with dealing with the police said that the way I'd been treated was so appalling and so incompetent, she couldn't even use it as a case study. She trains police. She couldn't even use it as a case study because it wasn't believable. That's how bad it was. I had police, they lost the evidence. They didn't do any investigation. I was having to do all the investigation, collating all the evidence for them, even though, of course, that meant that I was having to pay attention to all the threats that I was being sent, file them in a computer, send them off to them. Oh, we've lost these. We haven't gotten them for this guy. Can you just comb through all the rape threats you received and look for this specific handle? You know, basically asking me to go through the trauma all over again. They kept not telling me the bail dates kept getting pushed back. They kept not informing me. There was one particular time where I was chasing them for a week to just tell me what had happened. There was a bail date had gone past. I didn't know what had happened. Eventually, because of the Women on Banknotes campaign, I was in touch with some solicitors and I knew that they worked a lot with the police. They were kind enough to send the police an email on my behalf. The police replied to my solicitor within 3 minutes. They had the information, they just didn't think it was important to get in touch with me. I found out about people being charged through the press rather than from the police. It's got to the stage where I actually can't cope with talking to the police anymore because it's become so traumatic. And I suppose it might be difficult for you to understand why this just sounds kind of like bureaucracy. It might not sound that bad to you, but when you're dealing with something that has reduced you to essentially a nervous breakdown, some of you might have followed me on Twitter during it, and you know, the week before I had to quit Twitter, there was screaming in my head the whole time. Everywhere I walked, I just felt like there was screaming in my head. And the reason I quit Twitter was it was the only way I could think of to shut it down. And so when you're living on that edge of adrenaline and fear and having all these people attacking you from all sides, for a start you've got the rape threats, then you've got all the people who think they know what it's like, telling you to shut up, don't feed the trolls, you're only making it worse, as if they know what this means, or as if it doesn't matter to them how you might want to deal with it, that this might be a form of therapy for you, sharing it, telling people what's happening to you. And also the fact that, of course, not feeding them doesn't even work. I mean, there are people who are still stalking me online now. I haven't, reacted to them for months. Anyway, so there was just all this pressure, and then when you add to that complete police incompetence, police making you feel like you constantly have to justify why this matters, police sort of not answering your calls, not returning your emails, not keeping you updated, it's just a completely horrific process. And frankly, I feel like, this is what the police are like with me, and let's face it, this is a very high-profile case. The media were very interested in it. This was presumably the police at their best. I mean, as it turns out, it wasn't, but this should have been them putting their best foot forward, and I find it absolutely terrifying that this is what I've had to put up with. So, yeah, I think if you're a really strong person and you have support, and I've been lucky enough to have support, then report it. But, yeah.
Okay.
Also, by the way, not helped by the social media companies.
No, they haven't been.
This is the thing where I know from my experience as well, they didn't release any of the information that was necessary for the police investigation.
I've still got threats that have been made against me. So what is this, like 7 months ago now? And Twitter still haven't responded to the police and provided them with the information. I know a woman who is, she's a British Muslim woman, and she's receiving terrible death threats. And it's been over a month now, and Twitter just aren't responding to the police on her case. Twitter are pretty appalling, I think. I mean, they got forced into very reluctant action again because of this huge media pressure. When I talk about how awful my case was, I know how lucky I am because of the fact that I had this focus on me, and it meant that unlike a lot of people who've gone to the police and just been turned away, or have gone to Twitter and just, been completely ignored, they have been forced to do something. But the fact that they do so little when there's this much pressure on them, I think shows what a terrible situation is, and how little they get it and how little they care, really. So to give you an example, I sent an email to someone who works at Twitter saying that there was still more that needed to be done. For example, if you report someone on Twitter who's sending you, let's say, death threats, you have to tick a box at the bottom to say, yes, I'm potentially happy for my information, the fact that I've reported this person, to be shared with that person. So that's obviously putting a lot of people off from reporting. They've also got a completely inadequate blocking system, which means that you don't have a right to be hidden from people who are stalking your timeline. So, for example, abusive partners, people who, strangers who could be completely obsessed with you. There's no way for them to not see your timeline and what you're saying and see your movements, unless you choose for no one to see it. So it's, again, this option that women have of either not being able to join in with public discourse, or having people able to obsess over them and stalk them. Anyway, I sent this email to this woman. She forwarded it on to someone in the head office of Twitter. When I heard back from the person I sent the email to, a few months later, she hadn't even received a reply to say that they'd got the email, and I haven't heard anything about it, and this is about 7 months later. So, and of course in December, as we know, they reversed their blocking procedure to make it even easier for people to continue stalking people. It was essentially a stalker's charter for Twitter. So, yeah, police and social media, they don't get it, they don't care, and it's a big problem.
I think with Twitter, it's beyond that they don't care. I think it's a deliberate corporate policy. They're based in the US, and they are kind of going on First Amendment type of ideas about freedom of speech. And so there's an actually really interesting thing, when we were talking about whose freedom is it we're talking about. Twitter believes that the freedom of people to abuse us is more important than our freedom to live without being driven to nervous breakdown, and that's what you're seeing. So it's an interesting thing about whether there will be at some point a kind of female market response to this, where Twitter actually starts losing female users. It's not, as I said, for me, it's a tool of the trade, so it's not something I can stop using at this point, but it's something where if there was a valid alternative, I would really seriously consider it.
Yeah. Thank you. Jamie, you were just going to say something.
Yeah, something quite briefly. I get trolled for my articles, but it's quite a different type of trolling, and I think that's what's interesting. For me, it's usually because my articles are rubbish or poorly written or whatever, but it's very rarely about me, or I very rarely get any abuse directed at me to do with my agenda. It's always a different type of abuse, and to me that's something about internet culture more broadly. In the book that I've been researching, trolling is one of the areas that I've been looking into a lot, and it's probably the oldest subculture on the internet. It's been around since the late 1970s, and sort of formally as a set of ideas about how you engage with people online since the early 90s, when it referred to trawling for newcomers. So you try to find newcomers on the net. They'd say something silly because they didn't get some kind of in-joke, and then you'd attack them. Now, the thing is, back in those days, there were so few women online, because it was completely a male-dominated space, that any woman that did come online would pretty much routinely get covered with abuse. A little bit like that study that you mentioned that was quoted. And that culture, I think, has sort of continued throughout, a male-dominated space. And when women enter this space, just like historically, whenever women have entered any public space, they are then abused by the people that control that space as it is now. And I think that is what we are seeing at the moment.